For countless generations, humanity existed in quiet balance with its surroundings. We moved with the seasons, following rainfall and the migrations of animal herds. Our presence left minimal impact on the landscape, no more than fire ash or a muddy footprint. These ancient people were anatomically identical to us, possessing the same capacity for language and deep emotions. They held the same intellectual potential for solving complex problems as modern humans. Yet, for 97% of our history, they never constructed walls, bowed to kings, or waged wars of conquest. Then, this established order dramatically fractured. In what was a mere geological instant, our species fundamentally transformed its relationship with the planet. We ceased our nomadic movements, began enclosing wild spaces, and reorganized nature's hierarchy into fields and cities. This shift from a foraging existence to high-density living represents the most radical break in our biological history. It was the pivotal moment when our species stopped adapting to the world and began to actively reshape it. Popular perception often portrays the pre-agrarian world as one of perpetual hunger and misery, a life supposedly nasty, brutish, and short. However, skeletal evidence tells a different story. Upper Paleolithic populations were in exceptionally strong physical condition. They were tall, with dense bones, showing no signs of the repetitive stress injuries that later plagued agriculturalists. These groups were not living on the brink of extinction. They were highly adapted to their environments. This resulted in a strong sense of egalitarianism, where hierarchies of dominance, common among other primates, were actively opposed. If an individual attempted to coerce others or accumulate resources, the group had a simple, effective response. They could simply move away. In a world without borders or fixed property, freedom was measured by distance. For thousands of years during the Pleistocene epoch, this delicate balance persisted, with population numbers remaining low, limited by the carrying capacity of the wild environment. We existed as predators, fitting into the existing food chain rather than reshaping it. The prevailing climate further reinforced this dynamic. The Earth remained in a glacial state, marked by wildly fluctuating temperatures and advancing and retreating ice sheets. Such ecological instability made long-term settlement impossible. The land simply did not offer the conditions for agriculture until the ice began to recede. Roughly 12,000 years ago, the Holocene epoch commenced, ushering in a period of warmer and far more stable global conditions. In the Middle East, this dramatic climatic shift gave rise to a corridor of sustained abundance, famously known as the Fertile Crescent. Here, natural conditions profoundly favored human development. This region was home to the wild ancestors of crops that would later nourish much of the world: emmer, einkorn, barley, chickpeas, lentils, and flax. These plants grew in thick, natural stands. Vast herds of gazelles also migrated through these valleys in significant numbers. For the hunter-gatherer groups inhabiting this area, the fundamental logic of survival was about to transform. For the very first time, the energy acquired from food significantly surpassed the energy expended in its procurement. It was in this setting that the Natufian culture emerged, providing the first crucial clue in the mystery of civilization. For generations, the conventional wisdom held that agriculture compelled people to settle down, believing that farming techniques were developed first, leading to villages to tend crops. However, Natufian evidence tells a different story. They established permanent settlements long before a single seed was ever intentionally planted. A reliable abundance of wild grains allowed them to construct permanent, round stone houses. They built heavy storage pits and grinding stones weighing hundreds of kilograms, items that significantly restricted mobility and signaled a strong claim to the land. They had effectively become sedentary hunter-gatherers. With the advent of permanent dwellings came more profound social transformations. The Natufians began burying their deceased in designated areas, frequently beneath the floors of their own homes. A new concept began to take root in the human consciousness, that of lineage and inheritance. This transformed the land from a mere space for movement into a place deeply connected with memory, ancestry, and communal obligations. This sedentary lifestyle initiated a biological chain reaction. In a nomadic group, A mother can only comfortably carry one infant at a time, naturally spacing births 4 to 5 years apart. In a settled community, this limitation vanished, allowing Natufian women to bear children as frequently as every 2 years. Consequently, the population exploded. Small groups of a few dozen individuals swelled into villages numbering several hundred. This burgeoning population then exerted immense pressure on the local environment and the wild resources that had initially made settlement possible. However, around 10,800 BCE, a sudden and dramatic climatic shift, known as the Younger Dryas, turned the environment against them. Massive influxes of glacial meltwater into the North Atlantic disrupted the oceanic currents that previously maintained stable global temperatures. This resulted in a drastic cooling of the climate across the Levant, severely degrading the overall ecological conditions. Forests retreated, grasslands diminished, and the delicate ecological balances supporting their dense communities began to unravel. This environmental upheaval presented the Natufians with an unprecedented crisis, as the very abundance that enabled their settled life rapidly disappeared. Faced with dwindling resources, they were confronted with an agonizing decision about their future. One path involved abandoning their villages, dissolving their large communities, and reverting to a fully nomadic existence. However, such a return would necessitate a drastic reduction in their population, as the diminished environment could no longer sustain so many foragers. The alternative was active intervention. They could no longer depend on the natural regeneration of wild grains and began to manage them directly. This involved clearing competing vegetation, carefully selecting and replanting seeds, modifying soil conditions, and controlling water access. These actions marked a profound transformation in humanity's relationship with the land. Agriculture emerged not as a path to progress, but as a crucial survival strategy. Farming was born out of sheer necessity and immense pressure, a desperate attempt to stabilize a society that could no longer revert to its former balance. Through repeated harvesting and replanting, human intervention inadvertently altered the very biology of wheat, leading to domesticated varieties that could no longer self-propagate. This agricultural transition brought a significant decline in human health. Diverse diets of plants, animals, and micronutrients were replaced by a heavy reliance on starchy grains. Nutritional diversity gave way to caloric uniformity, and skeletal data clearly reflected this decline, with average adult heights shrinking in early agricultural populations. New physical burdens emerged from hours of monotonous grain processing, causing joints to degrade and spines to compress under constant strain. Women, performing much of this labor, often suffered chronic foot and lower back injuries from prolonged kneeling at grinding stones. Permanent settlements introduced another major risk: widespread disease. Mobile hunter-gatherer groups rarely provided stable conditions for pathogens to thrive. However, farming communities did, with dense populations living in close quarters, often alongside newly domesticated animals. Shared water, air, and waste created easy pathways for infections to spread between species, giving illnesses new opportunities to proliferate. Diseases like influenza, tuberculosis, and smallpox found fertile ground in these environments, severely impacting the health of settled populations. Despite worsening health and increased labor, the agricultural engine continued its development, yielding far more calories per unit of land. This supported larger populations, even as individual lives grew shorter and more fragile, making reproductive success the dominant evolutionary advantage. Population density surged, villages expanded, and with them came an unprecedented social challenge: the constant cohabitation with strangers. In open nomadic spaces, conflicts could be resolved by simply moving apart. Two disagreeing hunter-gatherers would just separate. Yet, in an agricultural society, separation carried a far greater cost, as a farmer's survival was intrinsically linked to their land. Having invested months of labor into a single plot, leaving meant abandoning their harvest, and, with it, their entire future. This immobility fundamentally reshaped human relations, transforming land into a fixed resource that was now owned, cultivated, and fiercely protected. Between cycles of drought and flood, this land held extraordinary potential. Over millennia, Rivers had deposited deep, fertile layers of silt. Few soils globally could match its capacity for food production, provided the water supply was carefully controlled and directed. The inhabitants of the southern alluvial plain made a critical decision. They shifted from relying on rainfall to embracing irrigation. Survival now hinged on constructing canals, building dams, and coordinating labor, a profound compromise that transformed human society. The uncertainty of rain gave way to disciplined water management. In exchange for abundant harvests, they committed to perpetual maintenance. The agricultural system crossed a threshold. From then on, civilization would rely less on natural rhythms and more on continuous human intervention. Irrigating fields in southern Mesopotamia meant digging canals for miles, continually clearing silt, and erecting dams against spring floods. These immense tasks surpassed what any single household or even a village could achieve, demanding large-scale, coordinated efforts. The need to distribute, plan, and control water led to new forms of power. The decentralized autonomy of earlier communities yielded to centralized management. Control over water flow meant control over survival. Some leaders framed this authority religiously, claiming to mediate between people and riverine forces. Their practical power involved administration, measurement, and enforcement. Compliance granted access to water. Defiance resulted in exclusion. By 400 BCE, Mesopotamia's southern plains were no longer natural, climate-shaped lands. They transformed into artificial environments, integrated networks of canals, fields, and storage. Population density rapidly increased within this sophisticated system. What began as agricultural management evolved into something far more permanent: the foundations of the first cities. Around 3800 BCE, the village ceded its dominance as human settlement. The city emerged, with Uruk exemplifying this new way of life, hosting 40,000 to 50,000 inhabitants. At its height, Uruk housed 40,000 to 50,000 people within a 6-mile radius. Such density was unprecedented for a species evolved to live in small, intimate groups. Village social life relied on acquaintances, but this system collapsed in Uruk. Daily, individuals navigated crowds of strangers, necessitating new social institutions. The city functioned as a powerful magnet, drawing raw materials from vast distances. Timber came from Zagros, copper from Oman, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. At the city's center stood the temple complex, acting as both religious authority and economic landowner. It controlled vast fields, vital canals, and livestock herds. The populace became deeply dependent on these institutional holdings for access to land, food, and security. This profound transformation is best seen in the Uruk period's most common artifact, the mass-produced clay, beveled rim bowl. Millions of these crude, mold-made, and nearly identical bowls litter Mesopotamian ruins. They were quickly produced in vast quantities, without concern for beauty or durability. These vessels served as standardized containers for rations, each holding a fixed volume. This amount represented a daily allowance distributed to workers. Their uniformity indicated a system for measurement, not family life, signifying a deep change in human existence. Much of the population ceased producing their own food, working instead on institutionally controlled lands and canals. They received measured rations as compensation. Uruk's walls offered protection but also enforced permanence. Opting out of this system meant forfeiting access to essential food. As Uruk expanded, human memory reached its limits for administration. A new solution was required, and writing emerged as a practical tool. The earliest Uruk clay tablets contain no stories or myths, but rather records of inventory, taxes, and wage distributions. Writing began as an accounting system. This development radically altered power dynamics. Information centralized, and document access defined authority. Scribes became new specialists, granting institutions unprecedented control. This development radically altered power dynamics, centralizing information and making document access the true determinant of authority. Those who could read and write controlled resource flows, with scribes becoming new specialists, mediating between people and the governing system. Written documents gave institutions unprecedented control, allowing them to quantify, predict, and enforce production, storage, and labor. Obligations were now fixed in documents, shifting administration from trust and memory to recorded data. The city gained a memory beyond human minds and a new form of control. By 2500 BCE, the priest's dominance began to wane, as a new power, the Lugal, or king, rose to overshadow the temple. As Mesopotamian cities expanded, they clashed over land and water, escalating into organized conflict. Small-scale raids gave way to standing armies, transforming warfare from a sporadic event into a permanent institution. This brought a monopoly on force. Kings offered protection from rivals for loyalty, labor, and taxes, making security a political lever. Militarization altered captivity. No longer an encumbrance, prisoners were now economically viable within city walls. They were absorbed, compelled to build infrastructure for their conquerors. Sumerian records show the sign for slave combined foreigner and human, encoding conquest into language. Early infrastructure relied heavily on this forced labor. While Mesopotamia forged an urban civilization model, it was not the only one. Along the Nile, Egypt's environment fostered a distinct, stable form of power. Protected by deserts and predictable floods, Egypt prioritized stability. Here, political and religious authority were absolute, embodied by the pharaoh. The pharaoh was a divine figure, the sole guarantor of Ma'at, cosmic balance. Further east, the Indus Valley presented a striking paradox. Cities like Mohenjo-daro had standardized bricks, organized street grids, and advanced drainage. Yet, they remain an enigma, with little evidence of palaces or royal tombs. Despite their advanced urban planning, these cities remain a mystery. Archaeologists found scant evidence of palaces, royal tombs, or standing armies. Power might have been distributed among a merchant elite, through ritual authority, or via social norms we no longer fully grasp. Without deciphered writing, their governance system remains shrouded in secrecy, possibly a complex civilization that existed without kings. Meanwhile, across the Yellow River and in the Americas, independent centers of civilization emerged, each built upon distinct cultural foundations. These regions domesticated diverse staple crops, from millet and rice to corn and potatoes, shaping their unique agricultural practices. Yet, a fundamental pattern persisted. Surplus food fueled population growth, and increasing density demanded coordination. This coordination, in turn, fostered hierarchy, ultimately leading to the formation of the state itself. While varied environments shaped distinct cultures, civilization's structural pressures propelled humanity toward a singular, converging path. The world we inhabit today is a direct continuation of systems whose fundamental principles were laid down millennia ago. We still operate within frameworks pioneered by early agricultural societies. Concentrated power, resource depletion, and the constant balance between security and personal freedom. The rise of civilization was a profound compromise, granting humanity the power to reshape landscapes, coordinate vast populations, and preserve knowledge across generations. These capabilities enabled large-scale culture, science, and technology, but came at a cost. Lives became embedded in systems demanding obedience, labor, and conformity. The open freedom of the hunter-gatherer world gave way to something complex, productive, innovative, yet profoundly constrained. This journey reveals civilization's enduring legacy and the trade-offs we still navigate. Join us next time as we delve into the story of Sargon and the world's first empire.